A thick fog rolled over the sleepy coastal town of Harbour's End in 1875, swallowing the streets and muffling every sound. In the heart of the mist, a single lantern flickered, its golden light cutting through the darkness like a beacon from another world. No one knew who lit it or why it appeared only on the coldest nights. But everyone in town whispered about the stranger. It once guided a man whose face no one could remember, whose footsteps vanished into the fog. The lantern's glow became a legend, a symbol of hope and mystery, but also a warning. Some lights are meant to lead, while others are meant to hide. Harbour's End was a town built on salt and silence, where the sea whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. The lantern on the old pier had burned for generations, its flame never dimming, even on the stormiest nights. Locals said it guided lost souls home, but no one could explain why it only appeared when the fog was thickest. In 1875, a stranger arrived, drawn by the stories of the mysterious light. He walked the misty streets with quiet determination, his eyes searching for something or someone only he could see. If you enjoy tales of mystery and forgotten places, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell us your age and where you're watching from, because every foggy town has its own secrets, and every age has its own stories to tell. Let's keep the old guard alive together, one lantern at a time. The stranger arrived in Harbour's End on a night when the fog was so thick it swallowed the sound of the waves. His boots left no trace on the damp cobblestones, and his coat was heavy with the scent of distant storms. The townspeople watched from behind lace curtains, whispering among themselves about the man who walked as if he were searching for something lost. No one dared to approach him, not even the boldest fisherman or the town's ever-curious schoolmaster. At the edge of the pier, the lantern stood tall, its flame steady despite the wind. The stranger paused before it, his face half-lit by the golden glow. For a moment, he seemed to speak to the light, though no words were heard. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the fog, following the path the lantern illuminated. The townspeople held their breath, waiting for him to vanish as others had before. But this time, something felt different. The air was charged with anticipation, as if the lantern itself were watching, waiting for a story to unfold. In the days that followed, the stranger returned to the pier every night, always alone, always silent. He would light a second lantern, placing it beside the original, as if honoring an old promise. The townspeople began to notice small changes. The fog lifted earlier, the sea seemed calmer, and the lantern's flame burned brighter. Still, no one dared to ask him why he came, or what he sought in the mist. The lantern's light, once a mystery, now seemed to hold the answer to a question no one had the courage to ask. As the weeks passed, the stranger's nightly ritual became a part of Harbour's End's rhythm. Each evening he arrived at the pier, lit his lantern, and stood silently, gazing into the fog. The townspeople began to share stories about him. Some said he was a sailor searching for a lost ship. Others believed he was a ghost seeking forgiveness. But no one could agree on the truth, and the mystery only deepened. One rainy afternoon, A young girl named Clara ventured to the pier, her curiosity outweighing her fear. She watched from a distance as the stranger lit his lantern, the flame casting long shadows on the wet stones. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward and asked, "Why do you come here every night?" The stranger turned slowly, his eyes soft but distant. "I come for the light," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It reminds me of someone I lost, someone who once guided me through the fog." Clara listened, her heart full of wonder. She asked no more questions, but from that night on, she returned to the pier with her own lantern, lighting it beside the stranger's. The townspeople noticed the change. The second flame seemed to brighten the first, and the fog seemed less heavy. The stranger never revealed his name, but his presence began to heal something in the town. The lantern's light, once a symbol of mystery, now felt like a promise that even in the darkest nights, someone would always be there to guide the way. The bond between Clara and the stranger grew stronger with each passing night. She began to share stories of her own, of her father lost at sea, of her mother's quiet grief, and of the loneliness that settled over Harbor's End like the fog itself. The stranger listened, his silence a comfort, and sometimes he would nod, as if recognizing a pain he had once known. One evening, as the lanterns flickered in the breeze, the stranger reached into his coat and pulled out an old photograph. The image was faded, but Clara could make out the outline of a woman standing beside a lantern, her smile gentle, her eyes full of warmth. "This was my wife," he said softly. "She lit the first lantern on this pier. She was the one who taught me that even in the darkest nights, light can guide us home." Clara's heart ached for him. She realized that the stranger wasn't searching for a lost ship or a forgotten promise. He was searching for a memory, for the comfort of a light that once led him through his own fog. The townspeople, too, began to feel the change. The lanterns became a symbol of hope, and more families started lighting them on their porches, creating a chain of light that stretched along the coast. The fog still came, but it no longer felt so heavy, so lonely. The stranger's story had touched Harbor's End in a way no one expected. The lantern's light, once a mystery, had become a beacon of healing, a reminder that even the deepest grief could be softened by the warmth of a shared memory. Winter arrived in Harbor's End, bringing with it a chill that seeped into the bones of the town. The fog grew thicker, and the sea roared with a fury that made even the bravest fishermen hesitate. But the lanterns on the pier burned brighter than ever, their flames defiant against the storm. One night, as the wind howled and the waves crashed against the rocks, the stranger did not appear. The townspeople gathered at the pier, their lanterns held high, searching the fog for any sign of him. Clara stood at the edge, her heart heavy with worry. She whispered his name into the darkness, hoping the light would reach him wherever he was. Hours passed, and just as the townspeople began to lose hope, a faint glow appeared in the distance. The stranger emerged from the fog, his coat soaked and his face pale, but his lantern still burning. He stumbled forward, collapsing at the foot of the old pier. The townspeople rushed to his side, wrapping him in warm blankets and carrying him to the towns. And Clara stayed by his side, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally awoke, he spoke in a voice so weak it was almost a whisper. "I thought I would never see the light again," he said, "but it guided me home." The townspeople realized that the stranger's journey was not just about finding a memory, it was about finding his way back to life. The lantern's light had saved him, just as it had saved so many others. From that night on, the lanterns of Harbor's End became more than symbols. They became promises. Promises that no one would ever be left alone in the fog. The stranger's recovery was slow, but the warmth of the townspeople's kindness helped him heal. Clara visited him every day, bringing stories and laughter, filling the quiet room with the sounds of life. The townspeople, inspired by his courage, began to share their own stories of lost loved ones, of dreams unfulfilled, of nights spent searching for a light in the fog. One evening, as the stranger sat by the window, watching the lanterns flicker along the coast, he turned to Clara and said, "You reminded me that light is not just for guiding the lost, it's for reminding the living that they are not alone." Clara smiled, her heart full. She realized that the stranger's journey had changed not only him, but the entire town. The lanterns were no longer just symbols of hope. They were beacons of connection, linking every soul in Harbor's End. The stranger began to walk the streets again, his lantern in hand. But this time, he was not alone. Children ran to him with their own lanterns, eager to share the light. The fog still came, but it no longer felt so cold, so isolating. The townspeople learned that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not the ones hidden in the fog, but the ones found in the hearts of those who dare to light a lantern in the darkness. Spring brought new life to Harbor's End, and with it a sense of renewal. The stranger, now stronger, began to help the townspeople repair the old pier and restore the lanterns that had weathered the winter storms. Children followed him, eager to learn the stories behind each flame. And the adults listened, their hearts open to the lessons of the past. One evening, as the sun set and the lanterns flickered to life, the stranger gathered the townspeople on the pier. He spoke of his wife, of the promise she made to always light a lantern for those lost in the fog, and of the journey that brought him to Harbor's End. His words carried the weight of memory, but also the warmth of hope. "We are all strangers at some point," he said, "but we don't have to walk alone. Every light we share is a promise that someone will be there to guide us through the fog." The townspeople nodded, their eyes shining with understanding. They realized that the lanterns were not just for the lost, they were for everyone who had ever felt alone, afraid, or forgotten. From that night on, the tradition of lighting lanterns spread beyond Harbor's End. Other towns along the coast began to do the same, creating a chain of light that stretched across the land, a reminder that no one is truly alone in the darkness. Years passed, and the legend of the lantern light in Harbor's End grew, carried by word and by flame. The stranger, now an elder, continued to light his lantern every night, His presence acquired comfort to the townspeople. Clara, now grown, carried on the tradition, teaching the children the stories of the fog and the light. The lanterns became more than symbols. They became a way of life, a promise passed from generation to generation. Each flame told a story. Each glow carried a memory. The fog still came, but it was no longer feared. It was a reminder that even in the darkest nights, there would always be a light to guide the way. One evening, as the stranger stood on the pier, his lantern in hand, he looked out at the chain of lights stretching along the coast. He smiled, knowing that his wife's promise had become a legacy, one that would never fade. The townspeople gathered around him, their lanterns held high, their hearts full. They knew that the light would always guide them, not just through the fog, but through life itself. The lantern light of Harbor's End became a legend, a beacon of hope and connection that stretched far beyond the town's shores. The stranger's journey taught everyone that even in the deepest fog, a single light can guide the way, and that no one is truly alone as long as someone remembers to light a lantern. If this tale of light and hope touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell us your age and where you're watching from, because every foggy town has its own stories, and every age has its own memories to share. Thank you for joining Old Guard Memories. Stay with us for more stories that honor the past and inspire the future.